What avoidants secretly expect during no contact. Let's talk about avoidance during no contact. You know, the person who pulled away said they needed space or just sort of drifted out of reach. Here's the twist. While they may look calm, collected, and like they've totally moved on, they haven't. Not really. And definitely not in the way you think. So let's pull the curtain back on what avoidants secretly expect when you go no contact, even if they would never admit it. When an avoidant pulls away and no contact begins, one of the things they often expect, without even realizing it consciously, is that you'll wait. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. They believe that on some level, you're still there, that your feelings are still quietly sitting on the shelf, untouched, just in case they decide to come back for them. It's not that they're intentionally manipulating you. It's more like they've become used to the emotional imbalance where they get to pull away and you're the one who stays emotionally present. Avoidants often build relationships that allow them to maintain distance. It's their safety zone. So when they retreat, it's not necessarily with the intention of ending things permanently. It's more like they're putting the connection in a drawer, closing it, but not locking it. And because they struggle with true intimacy, they don't actually process the full emotional weight of a breakup the way someone secure or anxious might. Instead, they shelf it. And in their mind, they assume that you're doing the same, just waiting for the door to reopen. They expect that if they pop up again, maybe weeks or months later, the dynamic will be right where they left it, that you'll still be receptive, that you'll still feel the same, that you haven't truly moved on, you've just been paused. It's part of the emotional bubble they live in, where real consequences are delayed or even denied. This creates a warped sense of time and accountability in their mind. They can detach for a while and still assume your emotional attachment hasn't changed, that the bond is strong enough to survive their absence without them having to do any work to maintain it. And because avoidants often avoid not just emotional closeness, but emotional responsibility, they never truly consider what no contact might be doing to you. They're not thinking about the healing, the growth, or the boundaries you might be building. They assume you're on standby. This silent expectation that you're emotionally on hold is rarely spoken out loud, but it's there. It shows up in the way they check in with vague messages or how surprised they seem if you're distant when they reappear. They're not used to people truly walking away. They're used to people waiting for them to feel ready. So they don't see your silence as power. Not at first. They just see it as part of the cycle they've come to rely on. The one where they leave and you stay. Avoidants have a deep-rooted need to maintain control over their emotional world, and this need becomes even more pronounced during periods of no contact. When they pull away, it's often less about cutting ties completely and more about creating space where they feel safe, a space where they can manage their emotions on their own terms. They want to be in charge of the pace, the boundaries, and the emotional energy they invest. This need for control is subtle but powerful, and it's why, even when they seem distant, they're quietly observing, measuring, and testing the waters from afar. No contact doesn't mean they disappear entirely from your life or mind. Avoidants tend to keep tabs in ways that feel low-key and non-committal, checking social media profiles, watching your stories, or occasionally sending a casual message that feels like it's not quite a reach out, but still a way to stay connected without fully engaging. This behavior isn't accidental. It's a strategy to maintain the upper hand emotionally. They want to keep you in their orbit without exposing themselves to vulnerability or pressure. It's about having options, keeping you available without having to commit or be transparent about their feelings. In their mind, if they can control when and how they appear, they can avoid the discomfort of emotional intensity. They don't want to be the ones chasing, pleading, or explaining. Instead, they want you to be the one who shows up when they're ready. This gives them the sense that they are the ones holding the power, the gatekeepers of connection. They avoid outright confrontation or deep emotional conversations because those threaten their sense of control and make them feel vulnerable. The silent expectation during no contact is that you will stay emotionally accessible, but at a safe distance, on their terms. They want to manage the relationship like a game, making sure they never lose control over how close or distant you get. It's a way to protect themselves from being overwhelmed or feeling trapped. Avoidants don't want to feel pressure to respond or explain themselves. They want the freedom to decide if and when they'll reconnect. This expectation can be confusing and frustrating for you, especially if you're someone who values clarity and emotional honesty. But from their perspective, maintaining control is a way of protecting their emotional well-being, even if it means keeping you hanging in uncertainty. They're watching quietly, waiting to see if you'll stay available without demanding more than they're willing to give. This gives them the illusion of emotional safety, control without commitment, presence without responsibility. Avoidants often don't expect you to truly move on during no contact. In their mindset, your silence isn't a final decision or a firm boundary. It's more like a temporary pause button. They assume that your feelings are still there, simmering beneath the surface, just waiting for them to come back and pick up where things left off. Because avoidants struggle with deep emotional intimacy, they don't fully grasp the idea that no contact can actually change the emotional landscape completely. To them, the connection is something you can just step away from and then return to without any lasting damage or shifts in attachment. This assumption that your silence is temporary leads avoidants to underestimate your capacity for growth and healing. They tend to see emotional separation as something reversible, not transformative. In their world, absence doesn't necessarily mean detachment. It means distance, yes, but not loss. They expect that when they're ready, you'll still be available and emotionally reachable, waiting for the connection to reignite. This can lead to a sense of complacency on their part, where they don't feel the need to confront their own emotional blocks or work through the reasons they pulled away in the first place. Because avoidants are often uncomfortable with vulnerability and emotional expression, they don't expect you to develop new boundaries or standards that might challenge the original dynamic. They believe the relationship can pick up where it left off unchanged because that's what they want. They don't anticipate that your silence might actually push you toward clarity about what you truly deserve. They don't imagine you'll use the space to reflect on your needs, gain confidence, or rediscover your self-worth. When they do start to notice signs that you're moving on, not just physically, but emotionally, that's when things shift for them. Suddenly, the quiet space they created starts to feel threatening. The idea that you could detach and heal independently undermines their sense of control. It disrupts their assumption that you'll always be there on standby. This is often the moment when avoidants feel anxiety or even regret because they realize that no contact isn't just a pause, it's a possible ending. This unexpected emotional shift challenges the avoidance internal narrative. They didn't plan for you to truly move on, and that realization can be unsettling. It forces them to confront the reality that the emotional connection they took for granted isn't guaranteed anymore. This is a crucial moment in the dynamic, one where the avoidant may either step up to engage more authentically or retreat further out of fear. Even though avoidants create distance during no contact, they often still crave reassurance, even if it's buried beneath their need to seem independent and emotionally detached. This craving doesn't show up as obvious or direct requests for comfort like it might in more openly anxious people. Instead, it's subtle and often disguised as indifference or aloofness. Avoidants want to feel validated and secure in the background, without having to admit it or actively seek it out. This creates a complicated dynamic where, despite the silence or withdrawal, they're secretly hoping for little signs that you still care. These tiny signs, what some call emotional breadcrumbs, might look like a like on a social media post, a quick message that seems casual but holds meaning, or even simply engaging with content you share. To the avoidant, these gestures provide a sense of safety. They act as low-risk confirmations that the connection isn't completely broken, that you're still there in some way, emotionally available but not demanding. This reassurance feeds into their need for control and distance at the same time. They want to know you're there, but they don't want to be overwhelmed by the intensity of closeness. Avoidants dislike vulnerability and often avoid direct emotional conversations because these make them feel exposed and unsafe. Yet, paradoxically, they still want to feel emotionally secure. This is why they may test the waters quietly, hoping you'll provide reassurance without forcing them to lower their guard. These small signs of attention let them feel seen and acknowledged without the pressure to engage fully or explain themselves. During no contact, this hidden expectation can be confusing or frustrating for you. You might feel like you're being ghosted or ignored, but in reality, the avoidant might be silently monitoring and hoping for a subtle sign that you haven't completely let go. This creates a kind of emotional tug of war where their withdrawal is balanced by a quiet need for connection. Their desire for reassurance isn't about needing constant validation, but about maintaining a fragile sense of emotional security. It's a way for them to keep the door slightly ajar without having to open it fully. When they receive these little signs, it eases their fears of abandonment or rejection just enough to keep them from feeling completely disconnected or threatened. This need for subtle reassurance shows how avoidants are often more emotionally complex than their behavior suggests. Behind the walls they build, there's a part of them that quietly hopes for a connection, but only on their carefully controlled terms. One of the most powerful and often overlooked things avoidants don't expect during no contact is that you will actually change the game. They assume that the dynamic between you will stay the same, that the emotional patterns, roles, and boundaries you once had will continue unchanged. Because avoidants prefer to keep things familiar and controlled, they don't anticipate that you will grow in confidence, set stronger boundaries, or realize your worth in a way that shifts the entire balance of the relationship. Avoidants are wired to maintain a certain status quo where they can keep their distance without losing the connection completely. They want the relationship to be comfortable for them, which usually means keeping you close enough to reassure them, but not so close that it threatens their independence. They don't expect you to evolve beyond the emotional limbo they're used to. When you engage in no contact, many avoidants think you're simply taking a break, waiting for them to feel ready to re-enter the relationship on their terms. What they don't see coming is that you might use the no contact period not as a waiting room, but as a launch pad. Instead of holding on or hoping for them to return, you might start valuing yourself more, learning to stand firm in your needs, and realizing that their pattern of avoidance isn't acceptable anymore. You might stop tolerating emotional breadcrumbs and start demanding clarity and respect. This is a fundamental shift, and it completely upends the avoidance expectations. The moment they realize you're no longer willing to play by their rules, no longer willing to orbit silently around their need for space and control, is often a shock. They may feel panic or discomfort because their usual method of maintaining emotional distance without consequence is no longer working. They thought no contact was just a pause button, but you've turned it into a door closing. Avoidants are not typically prepared for this kind of transformation because it threatens their sense of control and safety. When you change the game, it forces them to confront the reality that their avoidance may have real consequences. They might have to face their fears of intimacy or risk losing you altogether. This can either lead to growth on their part as they try to meet you in a new way, or further retreat as they resist the change. In essence, avoidants don't expect that no contact will be a catalyst for your empowerment. They don't anticipate that you will use the space to heal, set standards, and ultimately redefine what you will accept in a relationship. That unexpected shift in power dynamic is often the moment when the entire relationship either moves forward in a healthier direction or breaks apart for good. No contact isn't just silence or absence. For avoidance, it's a complex emotional landscape filled with unspoken expectations, quiet hopes, and subtle fears. They expect you to wait, to give them control, to not truly move on, to offer reassurance without asking for much in return. And they certainly don't expect you to change the rules of the game. But when you do, when you step into your own power, set boundaries, and reclaim your worth, that's when everything shifts. Not because you're playing games, but because you've stopped playing their game. Thank you so much for listening and diving deep into this often misunderstood dynamic. I hope this sheds light on what's really happening beneath the surface, giving you clarity and strength in your own journey. Remember, you deserve respect, growth, and connection on your terms. Take care of yourself, keep growing, and never settle for less than your worth. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.